But a lot of the things that the government does, one, the government shouldn't be doing it, and two, that is the job of the community to do. And if we're not doing it, then that's on us, and it's not on the government, because that's our job. Good morning, Idaho. Welcome to the Local Yokel Idaho podcast, where we talk about what is going on in the wonderful state of Idaho. For those tuning in for the first time, we like to have a little bit of banter before we get into the stories, but understand if you're short on time, you can skip the banter and jump straight to the stories using the timestamp that's in the description. For those that stayed, welcome. I hope you all had a wonderful week. I know mine has been busy with the new format that we've been tinkering with, plus some other cool stuff, which I can't say yet. We're working on it. It'll be coming out soon. Hopefully within the next month here as we're getting things ironed out. But before I speak about too many other things, and of someone who's also been probably very busy this week, I'm very glad to have John, the editor of the show, joining me to co-host again today.
Yeah, I am here, and it hasn't been as busy a week for me this time. It's just kind of been a week. There are, I will say, there are two new additions to my family. So my brother, his wife just had a baby. And then my wife's sister, she also had a baby. So we have some awesome new births going on, which is kind of exciting.
Very nice. I know likewise. I can't remember all the family names, but basically my uncle's son had a son in the last week or two. So there's that as well. So it seems to be that time of year.
Well, it's getting to be springtime, which is, time for new life and things. So that's kind of cool. Oh, and we also just bred our rabbits. So in a month or so, we'll have baby rabbits. And then in a little bit longer after that, we'll have rabbit food.
Yeah, you got to be careful with those rabbits. I know there's like a joke about how quickly they breed.
Apparently it didn't take too long to get them bred. The wife and all of the kids were out back standing around the cage for a while, and then they came in and they're like, "Well, the rabbits are bred." Oh, all right.
Like that was quick.
Uh-huh.
Were you, when this was happening, was it with the rather interesting weather we had this week? Were you guys out in that?
I had to drive around yesterday a little bit in the afternoon and was driving around in the rain, but yeah, the weather's been crazy though. Like it was nice and warm there for a minute, and then all of a sudden it was cold, and there was some rain, and then it was some snow, and then I think there was some hail, and then now it's beautiful and sunny again, and like it's been all over the place.
This week has been crazy.
And there was an earthquake. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Funny thing on that. So the day that I would say had the most interesting weather and the earthquake, which was Monday, I was in downtown Boise, and I went to the Capitol over there. We were like downstairs, and we were listening to stuff, and we heard like a rumble, which would have been at like 10:25 in the morning, which is when the earthquake hit, and we all thought, wait, are they getting out of session or something? They shouldn't have started by now or whatever. And then later we're sitting up in the gallery that overlooks the house, and the gal, she leans over to me, and she shows me her phone. She's like, there was an earthquake. I'm like, that explains the rumble.
Man, that's insane.
Yeah, you didn't feel like the ground was wobbling, but it definitely was like, what the what? And I was like, oh, wait a second. That's what that was.
That's funny. Yeah, I couldn't feel it from where we were at. But yeah, okay. I heard about it. It's like, what? Like, sure, I guess. We'll have an earthquake, because why not?
But in any case, speaking, though, before I forget about it with the Capitol, I won't go too far into that. But the thing I learned that was really interesting is that when you go to the House, every representative at their desk, they have a phone. And when you go online for them, you can find their floor number. And so while they're in session, you can literally call and tell them, don't vote yes or don't vote no or whatever on something, however you want them to go. You can have like a conversation. Like while I was sitting up in the gala, I'd regularly be seeing representatives getting phone calls and answering them and, talking to constituents, and then going on with what they were doing there at the House proceedings.
Huh. Crazy.
Yeah. It's not... The more I learn about it, the more I'm so glad I live in Idaho, because it's so easy to reach your local representatives. Way easier than I thought, oh yeah, I can send them an email. Cool, that's pretty quick. But no, you can call them on the floor.
Dude, that's insane. I can't say that I would have thought that that's a thing that you could actually do, but I mean, I guess it makes sense.
Right. And some of them I noticed, they'll have like their notes, but then they'll also have like their phone already open next to them, and that's like their email or text, so it gets to them quicker, so they don't have to be disturbed by the phone as quickly.
again, things I didn't know.
It's a resource. So if there's a particular bill you feel very passionate about and you know it's going to be voted on,
call your senator or representative during the session, I guess.
But yeah, something that to be aware of, and also something to be aware of that we messed up. I read my script wrong last week, and so we wanted to make sure to make a correction here. Last week, when we talked about the caucus, I read my script as March 22nd, which that was wrong. So just heads up that the caucus is on March 2nd. Granted, as you're listening to this, probably not going to be as relevant because this is going to be out Sunday, and the caucus is going to be out on Saturday. So sorry. But also on that of kind of new things and stuff, I teased it the last couple of weeks, new format. This week will be the first one we're going to kind of do that with. The first story will be in the new format. The second story won't. We would love to hear your feedback as we get into the show. But with that disclaimer out of the way, we will move on with the stories here. Starting off with our first story here, House Bill 545, the debate over local control and federal housing assistance. This bill is making its way through the Idaho legislature. If passed, it would impact the ability of local governments regarding federal housing programs such as Section 8 housing and rent control in the state. The bill in question aims to amend existing law to prevent local governmental units from enacting, maintaining, or enforcing ordinances or resolutions that would compel property owners to participate in such optional programs or regulate rent, fees, or deposits. Breaking that down, kind of giving you guys an overview of the topic, the first thing that kind of came to mind as we were researching this is basically what would it do for those that, you know, in that vernacular and everything, kind of breaking it down and simplifying it. One, it would just say that local governments such as cities and counties could not make property owners accept Section 8 housing funding or vouchers for tenants' rents or mortgage. Yes, I looked it up. It does apply to mortgage in some rare cases and stuff. And then two, the second thing it would do is it would affect local governments wouldn't be able to regulate rent, fees, and deposits in that sense. And so kind of coming into that, the other part that I also was wondering about when researching it was what is Section 8 housing? I have some good friends. If you're from California, you probably know about it. But as someone who's grown up here in Idaho, I did not. The official name for it is the Housing Choice Voucher Program. It's a federal program that's intended to assist low-income families and those struggling to pay rent. How it works is you apply for the program, then they review your application to see if you meet their criteria, which the biggest one is that you're low income because that's their intended goal. Granted, some of the other criteria include that by law, 75% of the vouchers must go to applicants whose income does not exceed 300% of the area median income that they're in, and that they're also a citizen of the U.S., and that they are free of drug or sexual offenses. If you pass through all of that and are able to get through the wait list, the program will pay the landlord directly, and then the family or person involvement program will pay the difference left over for rent or mortgage. And then as for how it currently works in Idaho, Section 8 housing program is administered by the Idaho Housing and Finance Association, or IHFA, which is in 34 of the state's 44 counties through its 4 branches of offices located in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho Falls, Lewiston, Twin Falls, as well as the oversight and administrative offices in Boise. However, as for the second half of the bill related to rent control measures, Idaho Code 55307 says, quote, "A local governmental unit shall not enact, maintain, or enforce an ordinance or resolution that would have the effect of controlling the amount of rent charged for leasing private residential property." Granted, Boise has tried to make its way around this bill by doing different regulatory things to try to affect the cost of rental prices in Boise, but not directly trying to regulate it. So bringing that all together, if passed, it would prevent cities like Boise trying to force landlords to accept Section 8 housing vouchers from the federal government for rent. It would also save taxpayers money because it would reduce the amount of money that the state has to spend on getting involved in the housing system and programs. As a result, it would probably decrease the number of landlords accepting Section 8 vouchers. It could also face legal challenges because in other states, laws on rental control have been challenged but not overturned. For example, in New York City, stringent rent stabilization measures were upheld despite a challenge with it, with the U.S. Supreme Court declining to consider a challenge by industry groups. So, all that said, that brings us kind of to our discussion, which the first point I kind of have here would be, should the state/federal government be involved in subsidizing rent and mortgage payments?
So it's an interesting one because I think at the heart of this, there is a compassion for people who need housing. And so I can see where someone who wants to help would say that, yes, the government should help with housing people.
Right.
The first house that my wife and I bought, we bought through a FHA loan, I believe it is, Federal Housing Authority. Yeah, FHA is like first time home buyer loan, and it came with the loan program, and I think we only needed 1% down on the house, and so it worked well. It got us into a house. Now, that came with some problems, and we see those problems in the rising costs of housing. So looking at a different industry, the other industry where I see lots of government subsidies, I guess there are two. One, I can see healthcare. Military, yes.
It doesn't affect the private sector as much.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of money spent to the private sector, but the military has a defined mission and, well, they're supposed to have a defined mission and goal. I don't know if they do anymore, but who knows? No, the two that I can think of where there are direct government subsidies, one is healthcare. And we've talked about healthcare here and there a little bit over the course of the show over the last couple of months. But the other one I see is college money,
right,
where the government is directly subsidizing and guaranteeing college loans. And we've seen the cost of college skyrocket since the government has guaranteed those loans be covered.
Right.
And so looking at those as parallels, the cost of health insurance or the cost of healthcare has skyrocketed, and the cost of college has skyrocketed, and also the cost of housing is skyrocketing. And those are three areas where the government has tried to become involved to help, and they haven't helped a darn thing. So, like, I understand the compassionate desire to help people. I understand the desire to get people in homes, and I get it. That's a good thing. That's a good desire. But the question is, what would actually be better, the government subsidizing it or the market correcting itself without the government trying to step in to solve the problem? Because it seems like when the government tries to solve problems, they just make the problems worse.
Right. And I mean, I will say it does depend on the government thing. There is a point that I can see the libertarian in the corner like, yes, get it out of everything. There's a point for the government within society. I have no doubt.
Yes.
We're not saying that. But
no.
With that said, when it comes into market things, when it comes into the prices of things, you have one extreme, which is communism, which says, no, I'm going to regulate all aspects of pricing. And I would point you to history. That doesn't go quite very well. And then you have the other end of it, which I would argue that America in its beginning, maybe a little less so currently, but tries to stay out of the market as much as possible, the free market in a sense. Granted, there is a point where the free market isn't 100% sacrosanct. So kind of on that with this, I would say, the government, the intentions might be just. I'm going to sit here and be as generous as I can to the Section 8 voucher. It can be just as nice as saying, hey, you've got a hard scrape. We want to give you some money to help you get through it, right? Mm-hmm. That is a loving, that is a Christ-like thing to do. But I would argue that's not for the government to do, that's for the church. Mm-hmm. And if you do it so regularly, then without, I would say, strings attached or accountability to it, because if like a church or a nonprofit does it, there's going to be strings that they can say, okay, yeah, we'll help you out with your rent. We can help you out with your mortgage or whatever. But the person who's getting it from those institutions knows that there's a certain amount of understanding that this isn't going to be your long-term way to stay afloat. And this isn't going to be the solution for everyone. If I have no doubt some nonprofit will be like, hey, we'd like to help you. And then they find out, oh yeah, you're just, you don't really need the funds. You're just trying to either find a cheaper way or you really don't want to actually improve your life. Right. Yep. Then those nonprofits can be a lot more discerning with that than the government can. And overall, that's better for those people, I would argue, that are in that kind of poverty area, which the main argument against this type of legislation is to say, well, it's not loving, it's not caring to our low-income people. And I would say, yeah, the most unloving thing is to give them this program because they're not actually going to be incentivized to get out of poverty. They're going to be incentivized to stay below a certain margin so they can keep their rent rather than lose it. We see it with other areas with like family funding where people are like, yeah, I don't want to get married because if I get married, then my taxes or some other thing, right, skyrockets. Or if I have more kids, that puts me in a different bracket and I have to pay more, or I don't get this program rights, benefits or whatever else. And so I'm just not going to, which doesn't encourage growth and development. And in this example, coming back more to the economic and less to the social, if the government's doing that, then builders are just like insurance can be like, well, I can charge this and I can get more, and the voucher program will cover that difference because you're so low on the bracket scale.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing I hadn't thought about. Is the drive into and to keep in poverty that our federal government has instilled for a long time. And yeah, so the welfare state is definitely a thing where you're actually incentivized not to make more money because if you make more money but not enough more money, then you're actually going to lose money.
And it's something that we've talked about on the show before with housing, and I'll beat my drum on this, and I know John agrees with me on this one, that the most loving thing that we could do for people that are in that poverty area, one, is to help our economy to actually make it where our money is a little bit more stable. That like that person who's saving a lot of money and they really don't, they don't have the money to invest to ride through inflation. They don't. That we need to get that inflation under control, that the US dollar is stable. So when they save $1, that dollar stays $1 for a lot longer. That helps those people that are more on that edge a lot more rather than prices of groceries and other things going away. But on the topic of housing, the biggest thing government can try to do to help with rent prices, to help with housing prices, is to go into those regulations, for lack of a better word, and figure out what can we do to encourage both safe, I'm not saying not safe, but to encourage us to build more houses so it can fit more people. Thus, we will have a greater surplus, and thus the cost will go down. The reason that the costs are high right now, and just speaking with Idaho, I don't know about the rest of the nation, right, was that there's a very high demand and there isn't a lot of supply. So if you can increase that supply, well, then you will be able to bring that cost down to people, not sitting there and telling the builder once they're done, or the owner of whatever place that is, oh yeah, you can only set the rent at this. That doesn't benefit, and that doesn't incentivize you to build more. It incentivizes you to sit there and have the ones you do have and keep hiking rates as far as you can get away with, and the Section H vouchers will be able to meet.
Yeah, I guess the question is what is the best thing for the government to do? And it seems like the government, if you want a government solution, then the government encouraging people to spend money in places that will advance society would make sense. And then discouraging regulations that don't help people spend money in good places. So
right,
getting rid of red tape would make sense. The problem is when you start talking about that, the easy line against it is to say, well, you're just getting rid of tax structures so that the rich get richer.
And the counter I would have to that is that those taxes, I 100% guarantee you, as a person who's learning a little bit more about this, as being a business owner for this show, if you really want to, there are ways to pay less taxes when you're an owner. It's incentivized in America if you own a business to not have to pay as much taxes, because America runs on entrepreneurship and new businesses. So you don't want to make it hard for businesses to come out. You want to incentivize people to be like, no, don't be a non-business owner, be a business owner, because you get all these tax breaks and different things. It incentivizes that growth, which is not a bad thing. But with that said, if you're trying to say, well, it's only going to benefit the rich, I would argue that getting rid of all these different regulations and taxes, in a sense, it's going to pull that off that low income person that doesn't have the mobility to try to avoid some of those taxations that richer person might be able to put it into cryptocurrencies or put it in some offshore account that they're going to do other stuff with where they don't have to pay it. Or example, with a lot of the CEOs, they actually don't have a, what's the name of it?
An income?
Yeah, they don't have an income. They're getting company basically paid like benefits or different things.
Stocks and options.
Which they're not taxed on.
Uh-huh.
Rather than the average person doesn't. And so they get caught up in this system that's trying ravenously to suck up money in the extent of make the rich pay, but then it ends up making the poor the most affected by taxes.
Donald Trump had his line when he was running
I remember this
the first time, and I think Hillary was going after him, and she was like, Donald Trump hasn't paid taxes in a long time. And he was like, yeah, that's because I'm smart. And of course, every Republican business owner heard that and was like, well, yeah. And then every Democrat worker was like, oh, he hasn't paid taxes and he thinks that makes him smart. What an evil rich man. And it highlights the divide that's in our country.
Well, it depends on your assumption. I personally assume that Trump will be better able to spend his money for the benefit of society than the federal government will be able to. Now, if you believe the federal government can, then yes, pay more on your taxes.
Well, and no one's stopping people from paying more taxes. You can do that. But then you start talking about statistics in terms of who actually gives money to charities. And that's where things get really interesting is you look at, and I'm going to Google this real quick. So,
I guess while John's looking for that and grounding it kind of back on our discussion here, whole goal of it is just to say, hey, in Idaho, that needs to stay an optional thing. There's different parts of the country that have taken the stance and saying, okay, Section 8 housing, according to the federal government, is optional, but within our state, we're going to mandate that you have to accept it as a form of payment for rent and mortgage, which this bill is trying to take the stance of saying, hey, it doesn't matter what county, doesn't matter what city, as a statewide policy for the state, progressing from that Idaho Code 55307, we're going to say, no, you can't do that. That code also states that the local governments can't control the rent charge, release, or whatever else, but I'm guessing some of that probably got around with COVID and different things. I guess kind of in a bit of a conclusion there as John's still looking. I hope this bill passes. I hope it keeps moving. It was voted on Monday, so I got to see that, and it passed. There was a little bit of contention on the topic, but it's moving on to the Senate, and it'll be interesting to see how it progresses that way. But did you find that stat you were looking for, John?
I found someone who was talking about the stat. It's linked to a New York Times article, and I don't pay for the New York Times. So this guy was saying that 91% of people who identify themselves as religious are likely to give to charities, as opposed to 66% of people who do not. And then one of this guy's most controversial findings was that political conservatives give more despite having incomes that are on average 6% lower than liberals, which is just one of those things. The common phrase is Republicans give more of their own money. Democrats are really good at giving other people's money and then try to take credit for that. And then at the same time, they funnel off some of that money for themselves.
Granted, Republican Party, not holier than thou, in its context sometimes.
Not at all.
I love it in that regard, but
and I think that's the difference between looking at the Republican Party as a political organization, as an institution, and then people who identify themselves as a Republican or conservative or a liberal or a Democrat. So Republicans and conservatives are more likely to give to charity, while liberals and Democrats are less likely, although they're more likely to say that the government should spend money on things that charities should be doing.
Which, with a lot of the things that the government does, example being this voucher programs, I am fully on the side that one, the government shouldn't be doing it, and two, that is the job of the community to do. That it shouldn't be the government that's funding nursing home. It shouldn't be the government funding the poor. That should be for society, for our communities, for the church, for nonprofits, for us to take that burden. And if we're not doing it, then that's on us and it's not on the government because that's our job.
I'm pretty much in agreement with you there.
Anywho, basically, that's moving through. If it's something that you care about, you might want to go for one of the committee hearings. Or as we alluded to in the banter, you could call them when it's on the vote on the Senate floor, in theory, and have a little friendly discussion and encouraging the position it should go. Obviously, I wanted to have this as one of our main stories because here in Idaho, the topic of housing is a very big one. And it's one that a lot of discussion and conversations are had around. And hopefully this will move forward. As much as I could hear some people that are going to probably fearmonger and say this is going to make it more expensive, it's going to make it harder for people to get places, I would argue it will do the inverse, that it'll make the free market do what the free market does. I just really hope that then the legislature or local municipalities will make sure to make room for the free market to meet that demand. Hey there. So if you like the show and the new format, you probably might enjoy watching more of the show, and that probably means you like a lot of stuff about Idaho. So don't forget to hit the subscribe button or follow button on YouTube, Rumble, or Twitter. That way you don't miss any of our future content about Idaho. Not to mention, if you found our content valuable or think it might benefit others, please like and share it. We have short clips from our show on our YouTube, Rumble, and Twitter account, which are perfect for sharing parts of the show that you found important or valuable with friends and family. Whether it's a fascinating political update or an intriguing local story, your shares and likes can help us spread the word about our beautiful state. As for our audio-only listeners on platforms like iTunes or Spotify, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Please rate the show and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us a ton and to improve the channel as a whole. Thank you for your support for being part of the local yokel Idaho community. Together, hopefully, we can keep Idaho informed, engaged, and involved in this wonderful state. Now, let's dive into the next story. But speaking of things of representation and election and all that and everything, Idaho House Bill 470 and the creation of the Office of Election Crimes and Security. Idaho's House Bill 470 is set to introduce a significant change to the state's approach to election integrity. The bill proposes the establishment of the Office of Election Crimes and Security within the Office of the Attorney General. This new office would be responsible for investigating and responding to allegations of election crimes and other violations of election laws. The creation of this office is expected to have a profound effect on the state's election process by centralizing the investigative and prosecutorial authority for election-related crimes within the Attorney General's office. The bill aims to streamline the response to election fraud and ensure that Idaho's elections are secure from both internal and external threats. However, the bill has not been without controversy, like most things in Idaho. Notably, the Idaho Secretary of State, who traditionally plays a significant role in overseeing elections, was not included in the drafting of this bill or in the proposed structure of the new office. This omission has raised concerns about the potential for overlapping responsibilities and the effectiveness of the new office in collaborating with existing election officials. Supporters of the bill argue that it will enhance the state's ability to address election fraud and protect the integrity of the voting process. Critics, on the other hand, worry about the potential for governmental overreach and the implications for transparency and accountability in election administration. The bill's passage would align Idaho with other states that have established similar offices, such as Florida, where the office reports to the Secretary of State. As the bill moves to the House floor, its supporters and opponents continue to debate its merits, with the potential for legal challenges and further legislative action in the future. Which, I will admit, my first inclination with this was that this isn't a good thing. But I will say I saw that it was over there in Florida. Basically, from what I'm understanding, instead of having like a bunch of different individual lawsuits or different things that are happening or court cases, that it would be a little bit more centralized at the state level so that things are moving along smoothly. I will admit sometimes I lean towards being like, centralization doesn't make me as happy in that sense. And sometimes it doesn't go great because we've seen other parts where attorney generals have had their hands in the cookie jar, shall we say. But it's an interesting idea. I get that Idaho is trying to sit here, and I think some legislatures are trying to be like, hey, we're doing something to curb and to be aware of election fraud, which seems to be happening more and more in elections. People are trying to tamper, trying to deal with it because of either passion or concern or worries or fears or whatever else. As for how this is formatted, it'll be interesting to hear. Obviously, it hasn't been voted on. I think it's still trying to move its way towards committee. Let me look here. It has passed out of committee with a due pass recommendation filed for second reading. So that's going to be voted on Monday.
Yeah, I wonder how much of this is reactionary to a lot of the things that we saw go wrong during the 2020 election in places like Georgia and Arizona and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Ohio. Like the list is quite long of places that had odd election things happen.
Right.
And so my question is this a knee-jerk reaction? Now we're 4 years after, so maybe not super knee-jerk, or is this an actual in good faith action to try and make sure that our elections are administered well and per the law? If it's the latter, where it is actually a good faith effort to make sure our elections are held with integrity, then sure, that sounds like it could be a good idea.
Right.
If we're just adding more people onto the roster for jobs that don't really need to be done, well, then it might not be worth doing. So I don't know. To really have an opinion on this, I would probably need to do a decent amount more research to figure out what this bill is actually doing and why.
Right.
Because I think it goes beyond what the bill is and why the bill is being pushed.
Right. And on that, I pulled it up real quick. And I went down here. So it's adding a new chapter to Section 1, Title 24 of Idaho Code. And the new section that's being added is Section 19 there, to establish the Office of Election Crimes and Security Pursuit, to Section 342601 Idaho Code, to exercise concurrent investigative and prosecutorial authority and responsibility with the county prosecutor to prosecute persons for the commission of election crimes set forth in Chapter 23, Title 18 Idaho Code, any other violations of election fraud set forth in Title 34 or Title 50 of Idaho Code. So, call me wrong, but reading that, I take that as there's going to be a new position there that's helping the Attorney General. And they're specifically focused on election, having a specific individual for that.
Yeah.
But it sounds like the Attorney General, the buck is still going to stop with them type of thing.
It seems that way.
It'll be interesting to see how it progresses. From what I'm seeing with the bill isn't giving the state any more power than it already has over election stuff. It's just purely saying, we're trying to make sure there's a dedicated person for this and that we're streamlining this at a central level.
I think you're right. I think this bill makes sense.
Right.
I mean, I could be wrong, but I think it makes sense. I don't necessarily see where it's a bad thing.
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, going forward with this, it's probably going to be voted on. I'll be very curious to see how the votes do end up playing out. But yeah, it'll be very, very interesting to see as it progresses with this. With that said, I know it probably seems a little bit more fast than we're used to, but thank you for listening to the entire podcast. I sincerely hope you found it enjoyable and valuable. If we missed any important points or provided incorrect information, please feel free to reach out to us by email at localyokelidaho2022@gmail.com or on Twitter by tweeting us at localyokelidaho. With the small team we have, we're not able to cover everything, but we do our best to cover the most interesting and important stories. Thank you for your continued support and assistance. That's all for now, and I wish you a fantastic rest of your week. Godspeed.